Committee reports have been presented. No bills have been introduced. The House comes to questions for oral answer. Question number 1 in the name of Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does he agree that the Prime Minister certainly moved to the extent of saying that he himself offered regulatory relief? If so, were other bidders to build a convention centre in Auckland offered regulatory relief?
Honourable Stephen Joyce, on behalf of the Prime Minister.
On behalf of the Prime Minister, what I stated quite clearly in the answer to question 2 yesterday was that regulatory relief has not been offered to Sky City. That may be part of the negotiations that they want, but actually all bidders were told that we were looking for creative solutions and it was a cash-strapped government. Every bid was different. In fact, in the case of every bid, with the exception of Sky City, they were asking the government for around $300 million to build it.
Order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
The Minister's answer just now equates essentially to a no to the first part of my substantive question. That is actually a quote given by you as Speaker yesterday, interpreting the answer of the Prime Minister that he had certainly moved to the extent of saying that he offered regulatory relief. We now have a problem because Mr. Joyce, answering on behalf of the Prime Minister, has come to the House today and effectively said no. So now we have the issue of your interpretation versus what the Prime Minister has actually said.
And I thank the member for raising the point. The member now cannot bring the Speaker into the debate. So I am ruling that the question has been adequately addressed, maybe not to the satisfaction of the member. The member has further supplementaries which he can utilise to try and obtain the answer he wants.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
The issue we have, Mr. Speaker, is that in effect it is not me that has brought the Speaker into the debate. It is the Speaker who has brought the Speaker into the debate by giving an interpretation that today has been contradicted by the Prime Minister, or Mr. Joyce answering on behalf of the Prime Minister. It leaves the opposition in a very difficult position in terms of being able to hold the Prime Minister to account when an interpretation is given by the Speaker and then it is contradicted by the Minister.
I accept the point being raised by the member as genuine, but I refer him to Speaker's ruling 17(3), where it is clearly stated it is out of order to bring the Speaker's name and opinions into the debate. The member has further supplementaries. Point of order, which one? Honourable Trevor Mallow.
Mr. Speaker, I think there are 2 points that I would like to make, and first to indicate to you that I contemplated writing a privilege letter yesterday based on your interpretation of Hekia Parata's answer, which, if she had given it, would have been a clear breach of privilege. And Mr. Speaker, what I'm trying to do is to highlight the danger of this situation occurring. I think the other point that must be made is that the Speaker's ruling to which you have referred refers to debate. This is not a debate. This is questions.
With respect to the member, this is a house of debate, and clearly when we have question time, there are issues of debate within question time. So I don't accept that part of the member's point of order. There's a further point of order from the Honourable David Parker.
I would like to continue that, Mr. Speaker, because dozens of speakers before you have ruled that there are rules for debate and there are rules for question time, and they differentiate. Mr. Speaker, you don't bring the Speaker into debate. We were quoting him at question time, and that is something which is quite different and quite proper. Your opinion, like anyone else's, can be quoted.
I took careful advice on this issue from the clerk prior to the beginning of question time, and I have concluded that the issue of bringing the Speaker into the debate applies equally to question time. Point of order, Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the difficulty arises where the Speaker interprets the question, because we're then left with interprets the answer, because members on both sides are then left with either not being able to refer to what is then put on Hansard by the Speaker in any way other than to pretend a fiction. We have here the Prime Minister saying that the interpretation that the Speaker put on the Prime Minister's comments yesterday was wrong. And I think that leads to the view that I think has been put by Mr Brownlee previously, as well as by opposition members, is this is where we get to when the Speaker interprets the answer that is given by a minister rather than requiring the minister to answer for him or herself.
I'll take the right honourable.
Mr Speaker, I don't think the New Zealand First would oppose the proposition that you can interpret the minister or minister's answer, providing that that is the answer that binds the minister as well. And if the minister wants to be excused from that, they must get up and immediately rebut it. Otherwise it stands in their name, and it means we can have a meaningful question time.
I accept the points raised are genuine. I accept the difficulty with this particular issue is my attempt to interpret an answer yesterday. The difficulty I am faced with is on numerous occasions yesterday, members who had asked a question then felt that question hadn't been adequately addressed. In future, what I will do is not attempt to reinterpret the answer, but will simply rule whether the question has been addressed to my satisfaction. And therefore, I don't think members can expect me to continue to justify the decision we made. The situation we have here today is that we are now relitigating rulings that I made yesterday, which will only lead to disorder. So I am concluding this matter. I'm inviting the member to ask supplementaries if he wishes to. Otherwise, we will move to question 2.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Is the Deputy Auditor General's finding correct that, quote, that his, quote, Chief of Staff asked Sky City for details of the regulatory relief it would seek in return for fully funding the Convention Centre?
Honourable Stephen Joyce on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, the Chief of Staff made it very clear that the government had no money for the centre and that Sky City needed to think outside the box and come up with something which might not work, but he did not specifically offer regulatory relief, which I think is the point the member is suggesting.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
It was a very specific question, Mr Speaker.
I missed the detail of the question. I invite the member to ask the question again.
Is the Deputy Auditor General's finding correct that his, quote, Chief of Staff asked Sky City for details of the regulatory relief it would seek in return for fully funding the Convention Centre?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, I'm not sure that that's, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I'm not sure that's a finding of the Deputy Auditor General. Paragraph 3.25 suggests that the Sky City told the Deputy Auditor General certain things about a particular meeting, but to suggest that that's a conclusion of the Deputy Auditor General is, I think, stretching the description of the paragraph.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question. Is it correct that what is written in paragraph 3.25 of the Deputy Auditor General's report is true, that the Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister asked Sky City for details of the regulatory relief it would seek in return for fully funding the Convention Centre?
Honourable Stephen Joyce on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I have no suggestion that what Sky City told the Deputy Auditor General was not what they interpreted the conversation to mean, but the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff made it very clear that the government had no money for the centre, they needed to think outside the box and come up with something which might work. And it's quite reasonable for two people to take different meanings from a conversation.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order.
The Prime Minister is responsible in this House for the actions of his staff, in this case the Chief of Staff that he has. It's a very simple question as to whether or not the statements contained in the Auditor General's report, paragraph 3.25, as the Minister has suggested, are correct.
Would the member ask the question again?
Is it correct? Is the statement in the Deputy Auditor General's report correct when it says that, quote, the Chief of Staff asked Sky City for details of the regulatory relief it would seek in return for fully funding the convention centre.
Honourable Stephen Joyce on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, my answer remains the same. It is clear that paragraph 3.25 in the report is Sky City's recollection of the meeting. The Chief of Staff's recollection of the meeting is, as I've repeated what I said earlier, that he made it very clear that the government had no money for the centre, that they needed to think outside the box and come up with something which might work. If Sky City interpreted in that manner, well then that's obviously for them to report to their own views to the Auditor-General.
Supplementary question. Does he believe then that the Deputy Auditor-General believed Sky City's account rather than his Chief of Staff's?
Honourable Stephen Joyce on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Auditor-General, that's what he seems to be suggesting, that somehow I'm answering questions on behalf of the Auditor-General. Quite fundamentally, I'm not answering on behalf of the Prime Minister. But the reality is the Auditor-General reported an item in the report in terms of Sky City's interpretation of a conversation. Whether the Auditor-General believes it or not, I have no idea.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Given that only one bidder was told that regulatory relief was a convention centre payment option and that information came via the Prime Minister and his office, what responsibility does he take for the Deputy Auditor-General's finding, quote, "We do not consider that the evaluation process was transparent or even-handed"?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, the member seems to be leaping on from failing to get to the answer that he was seeking. But the key point is that this period of the process was prior to the evaluations of the expressions of interest. And actually what the Deputy Auditor-General said in relation to this part of the process, and I quote from paragraph 3.32 of the report, "We have no concern that the government took steps to find out whether Sky City's development plans might be relevant to the discussions about an international convention centre. Nor is it unusual for a company like Sky City to approach government officials and ministers to explore whether there might be government interest in and support for its development ideas. Government and private business interests are free to talk to each other. It was sensible for both parties to explore whether they had a common interest."
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Would the Minister care to point his attention to the next paragraph of the report, paragraph 3.33, where the Deputy Auditor-General discusses her concerns about the apparent readiness of officials to support those discussions developing into more substantive negotiations without preparing to give advice on the government's procedural obligations and options? And what responsibility does the Prime Minister take for officials going down that path, given they only went there after he stopped the tender process in August 2009?
Honourable Stephen Joyce on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Well, on behalf of the Prime Minister, well, Mr Robertson and I can quote paragraphs of the report to each other all afternoon. I would perhaps conclude by quoting paragraph 3.44, which, to be helpful to the member, is actually at the conclusion of this chapter, and that says, "The matter became moot because Sky City did not produce a proposal at this time. Instead, the Minister, which I presume is the Minister of Economic Development, directed officials to proceed to an EOI process as part of a broader discussion of economic development possibilities."
That's right. Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Why did he ignore the warnings from Treasury about, quote, "the probity of the bidding process" contained in a briefing note given to him on 12 November 2009?
Honourable Stephen Joyce on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, he addressed the note yesterday. I'd only go and repeat what was said yesterday, that in relation to that note, my understanding is that that was in relation to if matters were to proceed to a PPP, which of course is noted in paragraph 3.43 of a report. And in case the member didn't remember, it didn't go to a PPP, so that also becomes moot.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary
Is the Prime Minister telling the House that he takes no responsibility whatsoever for the fact that a process around the convention centre, to quote the Deputy Auditor-General, failed to meet basic standards of transparency and fairness? Is he taking absolutely no responsibility for that?
Honourable Stephen Joyce on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, having failed to make his points, the member likes to make a sweeping generalisation at the end. The reality is the Auditor-General said there were no substantive issues in relation to the process, and nothing that would change the outcome of the process, raise some procedural issues in regards to the expressions of interest, and the member just doesn't want to hear it.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
How does he reconcile his statement in the House yesterday that, quote, TVNZ entered into a commercial agreement with Sky City to sell land that it owned, with the statement from the TVNZ board chair Wayne Weldon to the Commerce Select Committee today that there was no such commercial arrangement?
Honourable Stephen Joyce on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I'm not quite sure how that fits into the question one frame, but nevertheless, the Prime Minister was answering yesterday accusations of a cosy deal brokered by the Prime Minister between TVNZ and Sky City, and fundamentally it is obvious that did not occur.
Point of order, Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to refer you to your ruling made earlier at question time as to the difference between debates and question time, where you indicated there wasn't, and refer you to Speaker's ruling 1681 from 2011, Dr. Smith. The rules for question time are very clear. It is not a time when we have debates, we have questions asked.
I thank the member for his contribution. I will consider that, but he is now relitigating an earlier ruling of mine where I said to bring the Speaker into a question was bringing the Speaker into debate, and that would lead to disorder. I move now to supplementary question.
Yes.
Right, Honourable.
On the issue of regulatory or other relief, why did the PM say yesterday, and I quote him, its architects designed such a thing, realised they needed more land, worked out who owned the land and approached Television New Zealand, unquotes, when TVNZ claims overnight that that statement is false?
Honourable Stephen Joyce on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Well, on behalf of the Prime Minister, he accepts the TVNZ assurance accordingly. But I think the point is, and perhaps the member misses, that actually goes to underline the fact that there was absolutely no conspiracy about a TVNZ land purchase and sale, because fundamentally it obviously hasn't occurred.
Supplementary question, Honourable Winston Peters.
Well, the question really concerns to the Prime Minister, why did he say it yesterday, and when was the government going to advise TVNZ of the regulatory relief that was prepared to offer Sky City, given that the deal would include TVNZ land?
Honourable Stephen Joyce on behalf of the Prime Minister.
The member is pirouetting. Yesterday there was some terrible conspiracy. Today there's a criticism of the fact that hasn't occurred.
Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr. Speaker, it was a straightforward question. I think Winston Peters might be nimble on his feet, Mr. Speaker, but he is not doing ballet in the House.
Yep.
And you, sir, should make sure that
it would be
ministers answer questions in a straightforward manner.
I thank the member for his assistance. It would be helpful if the Honourable Minister, on behalf of the Prime Minister, would give a clear answer to the question. Would the member, Winston Peters, please repeat the question?
I'll put the question again. When was the government going to advise TVNZ of the regulatory relief it was prepared to offer Sky City, given that the deal would include giving away or transacting TVNZ land?
Honourable Stephen Joyce on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, no deal has been concluded, so that matter does not arise. It has been raised publicly that some land might be needed. If a deal was done, that would be progressed at the time.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question. Right, Honourable Winston Peters.
Is it not a fact that on 6 September 2010, the Ministry of Economic Development received an aid memoir from Sky City asking the government to, quotes, contribute, into quotes, land owned by TVNZ as part of this deal, and furthermore, that the Ministry undertook extensive work to determine the valuation of the property and to clear up any Treaty of Waitangi claims on the property?
Honourable Stephen Joyce on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, one of the criticisms of officials from the Deputy Auditor General's Office were places where they did not do preparatory work. I'm assuming the member is now being critical of them doing preparatory work in regards to a matter in relation to any land that might be required if a deal went ahead. But the reality is No deal has been agreed, and until such time, any arrangements in regard to some land are moot.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston Peters.
On the subject of preparatory work, why does the Prime Minister consider himself so unaccountable to the New Zealand public and taxpayers as to attend official meetings as the Prime Minister and at the taxpayers' expense where no record is kept at all of that meeting?
Honourable Stephen Joyce on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, he meets and discusses things with people all over the country, informally and formally, at many different times. Generally, the records are kept of formal meetings, but that doesn't mean that there can be any expectations that every time the Prime Minister talks to somebody that somehow there'll be a formal minute.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Did the Prime Minister go to the meeting with respect to the Auckland Convention Centre involving Sky City with the deliberate intention that no record be kept, because any record would demonstrate just how sleazy these deals are?
Right, Honourable Stephen Joyce on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I would just say I reject completely the premise in that member's suggestion.
Supplementary question, Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Prime Minister accept the conclusion of the Auditor-General's report, and I quote, that we do not consider that the evaluation process was transparent or even-handed?
Honourable Stephen Joyce on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, again, this is a fair way from the start of the question, which was about what the Prime Minister offered or not offered in regards to the very early meetings in this process. But in terms of the expressions of interest process, the Auditor-General has made it clear that she feels that what a clown.
Order!
What a clown.
If the members want to hear the answer, they should allow some silence for Mr Joyce to answer the question.
The Auditor-General made it absolutely clear, Mr Norman is over here in case you haven't noticed, he made it absolutely clear that she felt that the officials should have closed off the expressions of interest process earlier, and the officials accept that criticism, and the Minister of Economic Development is working with the officials on further guidance in that regard. But she also makes it clear there is no substantive concerns about the conclusions reached through this process. There were some procedural issues. The government accepts the procedural issues, but they were not substantive and would not have changed the outcome of the process.
Well, point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, Dr Russell Norman.
I seek your guidance as to whether you think my very simple question as to whether the Minister accepts the conclusions has been answered or not, because it didn't appear that it had been to me.
I think the Minister addressed the question very substantially. In fact, took too long to do so. Move to question number 2, David Bennett.
Mr Speaker, my question is to